First time I was sexually abused, I was 4 years old. A trusted neighbor from across the street was over at our house, and he offered to tuck me in. So I went upstairs and grabbed my favorite book. At the time, it was Dr. Seuss's The Butter Battle book. So he read me that story before he sexually abused me. The next morning, I woke up and threw the book in the garbage. And even as a young man, the thought of Dr. Seuss would trigger a huge emotional response in me. Now, how horrible is that, right? Not being able to enjoy The Grinch over Christmas. At 15, I started my first job. I worked at an optometric clinic as an administrative assistant. One day, I was sorting through the files, and I came across my abuser's name. I quickly composed myself, quietly walked to the bathroom, and locked the door. I sat in there for 30 minutes with my hands over my mouth as I wept. At 21 years old, I was living in Sudbury, Ontario, completing the paramedic program at the local college. It was the most difficult time of my life. I had finally hit my rock bottom. After a long day of school, doing all my homework, rather than going home and going to sleep, I would come home and sit on the kitchen floor. I would put my back against the wall, my head in my hands, and tears rolling down my cheeks. It wasn't because I wasn't tired. In fact, I was exhausted. I couldn't physically make myself go get in that bed. It was during this time that my nightmares became extremely violent and aggressive. And so I was absolutely terrified to fall asleep. If I was lucky, I would pass out on the kitchen floor for an hour or two. The next thing I know, I would look at my watch, and it would read 6 a.m. It would be time to get up and go to school. It was around this time that a family friend took me out to dinner one night. She went to drop me off, and I completely broke down in front of her. I'm lucky that she's a very, very supportive human being. And a couple days later, we were in the crisis unit in Sudbury's regional hospital. After completing the intake interview, I was handed a list of therapists to contact. So we went to the list and began calling each therapist. Each of them provided me a quote that was far outside my student budget. As we continued down the list, the same common theme occurred. Finally, we had reached the college that I was attending at the time. I was extremely reluctant to receive my counseling at the college. Being in such a small, tight-knit community, I knew that one day somebody was going to catch me walking in and out of that counseling center. But at this point, I was out of options. We called the counseling center, explained the situation, and asked them for their services. They said, yeah, of course, we can take on Paul. At the time, it was the beginning of January, and they said, our next available appointment is at the end of April. Well, needless to say, I wasn't going to make it to April. I could barely make it through the week. So back to the list we went. One of the last names on that list was a private therapist named Jack Julin. We called Jack and basically begged him to take me on as a client. Eventually, he agreed and took me on for free. My first session with Jack was extremely, extremely painful. I showed up in a significant amount of distress, big tears rolling down my cheeks, and just completely hysterical. After about 5 or 10 minutes, Jack folded up his book, he sat back, looked me in the eyes, and very calmly said, Paul, I was also sexually abused. It won't always be this way. Now, I was completely floored. Here was a man who was disclosing his abuse to me. He didn't have big tears running down his cheeks. He was not hysterical. In fact, he had a bit of a smile on his face. I continued to see Jack every Saturday morning for the remainder of the semester. Now, somewhere in there, I received a formal diagnosis from a physician with post-traumatic stress disorder. I was also struggling with depression, generalized anxiety, and insomnia. As I became more public about my abuse, I decided to come up with this crazy idea that I wanted to start a charity. Eventually, this charity became the Canadian Society for Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse. I knew that if I had to overcome these financial barriers, I couldn't be the only guy to have to do so. So what I wanted to do was provide access to funding for men who had been sexually abused so they could go overcome their trauma and go to therapy. As it became more public, men began reaching out to me and sharing their very, very inspiring stories to me. But a common theme that began to emerge was that these men had difficulty disclosing their abuse to the ones they cared for the most, their family and their friends. It was never my intention to provide therapeutic services through our charity. So I thought to myself, how can we address this issue? After a lot of critical thinking, we came up with our community support programs. The first being our buddy system. The buddy system aims to connect men who've been sexually victimized based on a common interest. So for example, let's say you like golfing. That's awesome. We put two guys together who love golfing. How about just a quick cup of coffee every once in a while? That works too. And what happens when you put these two guys together with this shared experience and shared interests, the type of bond that they form is just remarkable. Now, on the other hand, we have our community participation program. And what we do here is we try and reconnect men with the community. And when we do so, we create this sense of belonging. Now, this part of our program is not meant strictly for men. In fact, we encourage for family members, spouses, and friends to take part in this program. I know from my own experience that often sharing my abuse with those that I love the most was the most difficult. And so, with the community participation program, by including these individuals, we're hoping to open up that discussion to these groups. Now, when I began today, I told you I was going to share with you the greatest experience of my life. In July of 2012, I faced my abuser for the first time in 15 years. I had filed a statement at the Ottawa Police Department and was going to have my day in court. Now, I didn't go in there looking for a guilty verdict. I went in there to take back the power that man had stolen from me as a child. I wanted to look him in the eyes and tell the whole world what he had done to me as a young boy. Well, I was cross-examined for 4 hours. I was on the stand for about 6, and I never took my eyes off him once. Unfortunately, his eyes never left the floor. Now, in the last 3 years, I've conquered my inner demons. I faced my abuser in court, and I started a charitable organization to help men who've been sexually abused. I'm not sharing this with you today to brag. I'm sharing this because I'm proud. I sincerely believe that we all have the inner strength to overcome any sort of trauma given the opportunity. And I was lucky enough to have somebody present me with that opportunity. We as a community need to create an environment where we support individuals to not only better themselves, but to overcome their trauma rather than hide from it. My name is Leduc. This is my vision. Thank you.